Ahoy! Joe Buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Night Games. This time we got a long one for you. It's Ring of Warmth, and it's good from now all the way through February the 28th, and it will get you 10% off orders of $10 or more at Noble Night Games. That's right, the code's going to last a long time, and it's a long code as well. It's Ring of Warmth to get you 10% off orders of $10 or more at Noble Night Games running through February the 28th. It's a perfect time to get more games after the holiday season, and if you haven't yet, why not check out Noble Knight's trade-in program? I just did it myself. It was super easy, and now I have room on my shelves to put more games. And when I buy those games, I want to buy them from Noble Night Games. I'm going to use the code Ring of Warmth, and it's running now through February 28th from our friends over at Noble Night Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. I kind of couldn't even figure out a joke today because every time Stu told me about what we were going to talk about, I kept going, huh? Stu Horvath. What the hell are we talking about today?
Okay, so we are talking about the stuff that Tim Hutchings has released through the Play Generated Map and Document Archive. So that is something, basically is game ephemera, stuff on paper that players of all types, your players and your game masters have created and recorded on paper for their own use. Basically, when you buy a secondhand box set and you find some character sheets or maybe a dungeon, maybe a little bit of notes for an adventure in the back, and your heart thrills a little bit because of that.
I know, you just mentioning it made me smile for miles. So yeah, absolutely.
The idea is to collect stuff like that and to collect that feeling, I think. And basically Tim Hutchings is the fellow who did 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. And these predate that. And they're sort of just an effort to kind of collect and reprint some of this material. The website for it had an open call for submitting that stuff for preservation. I don't know how active the project is anymore. It seems like it's been a little while since there was an update. On the other hand, these books I feel like they came into print in the last couple of years. So it feels simultaneously old and out of date and brand new to me. So I don't really know where we lie. The copyright notices on the books are rather old. The one is 2016 and the other is 2013. But I'm pretty sure that I only got one in my hand a couple of years ago at the head of the pandemic. So I don't know. Time is meaningless, and that's something that we all have to wrestle with in our own way in this brave new world. So there's two books here that I wanted to talk about. One is the Oracle, which is it's the complete Oracle. It's 5 issues of a gaming zine that was sort of like it lasted far longer and was far more successful than the creator ever really intended it to be or expected it to be, out of Utah. And this is a nice hardcover reproduction of the zine. And there's also Hutchings in the back, basically collects everything that this guy produced. So there's some adventure material, notes, scrawled maps. It's great. A couple other additional zines that the guy produced, which is for fiction. And then there's a hypothetical 6th issue, which Hutchings sort of commissioned people to write who are making games now and who were around back then, to sort of write in their 1984 style for like a dream of a magazine. The thing about the Oracle is that it was so much bigger and had such more reach that it ever had any right to get. You had like serious people writing for this thing. Christopher Bigelow is the fellow who wrote it. He was in high school when he started it, and it really impacted his studies. like to the point where I think that he got credit for like a class for it, but it also like impacted his grades in a way that his parents were really upset about. Being in Utah, he was in a he was raised Mormon, so that there is a little bit of a culture clash that's on display here. In the introduction, he sort of describes his parents as being not super thrilled with the content, especially when there's like chainmail bikinis involved.
I mean, what parent in the 80s responded well to horniness by teens? Am I right? Like,
that's true. I mean, it's the same now, right? So it's just this really great little historical time capsule. There's a lot of it is arranged around the grumbling that was in the DIY scene about Gary Gygax's stance that Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition was a closed system, that you couldn't modify it. Modifying it breaks it or somehow renders it unclean, for lack of a better word. Like Gygax really wanted to sell this idea that like you had to use it the way he intended, whereas the earlier edition of Dungeons and Dragons and the basic version of Dungeons and Dragons were, you know, hack to hack, and that was fine. And like it was just the DIY community was a ridiculous argument on its face. So the folks in the zines and, you know, the press associations and all that stuff, the APAs, they all really hammered him back relentlessly because they were doing it like they were modifying the system and it wasn't breaking. And, you know, it was just this really ridiculous kind of like corporatist stance that Gygax took. And a lot of that plays out here. There's a lot of art. He has like big name artists, not big name artists, but like,
well, it's like, I get it to a degree, because, you know, if you write something like a rule set and someone wants to hack it and they think they can do a better job, they can hack it, they could do a better job, and they could actually print it and get it out to people. It's not like when you're like watching Star Wars, you're like, oh man, I could do a better job than that. Like, you need a budget for that.
That's true.
You know, and like much higher corporate approval than a book. So I think if anything, the open gaming license is proved is that, like, if you're going to do it, at least you're going to do it over the table, give credit where credit's due. But yes, you can make your own hack of things, and you can, from your basement, write it up, send it off to printing, get it distributed, and you could actually be like, well, yeah, I could do a better job than you. And I just did that, you know? So yeah, I get it. To a degree, I get it.
Yeah. And I get it, but it's also, you know, you're going to have to work real hard to convince the people who are doing it to like lay off.
Yeah.
Because most people weren't doing it to compete. Most people were just like sharing stuff that they came up with for the game in like venues like Alarms and Excursions, or, you know, the Oracle. And while on one hand, the Oracle is super impressive, it was an international zine. He managed to get it distributed all over the place. Like, that's crazy to me, especially in like, you know, 80s.
I love that.
Like, this kid was so enterprising. Part of it is because fiction author CJ Henderson kind of got looped in early on, so he had like all of these like New York connections that kind of like professionalized this thing in a really rapid and unusual way. Peter Laird does a cover, one of the you know, like Peter Laird.
Wow.
Right. And this is right before, you know, the Oracle sort of shutters in 83. So it's like right before Ninja Turtles. And of course it all implodes because like he's a kid in high school and like girls and grades. There was just sort of like this, I think that the people working on the zine thought it was a much more professional outfit than it really was. And I just think I think that it's funny that like that kind of, it feels like an 80s movie, almost like a Ferris Bueller's Day Off or something, like where like kid gets like, you know, publishing contract, but he's like 13. So he's like fish out of water, and nobody realizes he's 14 because he casts like, I don't know, like a baby faced 20-year-old, you know? Yeah.
And also like at any given point, this is cool, but he could get grounded.
Right. There's a comic strip in the back of most of them, and one of them has like a pretty scantily clad warrior lady, and he writes in the introduction that like his parents were really not happy about that. But like, what were they gonna do? Like, he created like a business that was making money.
but still needs his parents to like drive him to the printer and like sign legal documents.
Yeah, but like as a parent, how do you scold the kid for being successful? You know, it's all of it is like very screwball comedy to me.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely does feel like that 80s movie where like the kid is like, I need to make this happen. And the kid's doing all this stuff. And they're like, well, Johnny, you can do all this stuff. And we're really proud of you. But, 10 p.m., lights out.
Yeah. And I think that sort of was an ongoing problem. And I think that there might be a story in here about long distance phone calls and the cost of them. That's pretty funny. But
God, amazing.
But this is it's a hardcover book. It collects like the entire output of this kid, his little do-it-yourself zine, and it's pretty impressive. He's got all sorts of stuff in here. Unfortunately, the zine, Henderson's influence kind of moves the zine from game focused stuff to reviews, which is still cool. But I think that the game stuff that Bigelow generated for this is much more charming, even as the reviews are sort of much more like the time capsule. But it all told, it's an interesting thing. This was published in an edition of 500. So I don't know if there is an unlimited edition now, but I'm sure that you could find it on drive-through. The other book, Hambone, is called The Habitation of the Stone Giant Lord and Other Adventures from Our Shared Youth. It reprints a series of like modules created by kids in the 80s.
Oh, yes, just take my money.
It's so perfect and pure. Because I made this stuff. It's people making adventures for their friends and going that extra mile to just kind of package it in the same way as the adventures that are in the store. And like, you don't have to do that to play Dungeons and Dragons or any other game. You could just have like a couple notes on a piece of notebook paper. But the fact that like D&D and other RPGs inspired these kids to like make these elaborately illustrated, crude but awesome things that are sort of in the mode of the professional total air quotes around that, because most of the it took decades before like you were getting real professionally printed stuff out of like the commercial end of stuff. But like it's just, they're so gorgeous. Some of them are printed out on like notebook paper, there's graph paper, bad typewriter paper, drawings all over the place, uninspired maps. It's so fantastic. It's so good. I don't really know what else to. There's one called the Lair of Turgon that uses like 1986 era clip art. I don't know how to talk about this other than to say just like you need to see it and flip through it and love it. It's just such a trip, man.
I'm smiling so hard. I really love it. That's awesome. That is awesome.
We have such power in the palms of our hands that we don't appreciate, like desktop publishing capabilities that we all have between our phones and our computers and our laptops. I feel like this stuff is so endangered because I think that kids today can just produce stuff that is like a higher level of professional quality with ease. Like there is really no need to handwrite your adventure if you're inspired to do so as like an 8-year-old, right?
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. And I think that to a degree, and I'm not trying to be the old guy in the room, because I think that it is so impressive that a kid today can go and like put together like a legitimate, like I made this adventure for my friends and like lay it out on their little laptop. And like, suddenly it's like, well, shit, you're like a hop, skip and a jump away from like actually publishing this. Whereas it was like, I'm doing this with crayons. I'm doing this with colored pencils. I got like the whole set of colored pencils. We're getting weird today. Like there's a certain primalness that comes from what we had to do as kids in generations before us to like create and put something out. And like, you almost kind of had to go to school to learn how to do like real publishing, as it were. And now it's like, it's pretty cool. It is pretty cool to a degree where like kids can just like, all right, I took like a 20-minute class or I watched a YouTube video and now I have like this scene where, there you kind of like lose a little bit of that like energy that comes from like having to really figure everything out by hand yourself.
Yeah, I think that what you there's like I said, I used the word pure before, and like I don't mean that as like a moral thing, but there's like an unfilteredness to this vintage material. It just because like the trade-off, right, is that like you have to have the internet, and the way culture works right now, it's constantly hammering you. There's no silence. You don't have room necessarily. Like you have to work to make room for silence for you to kind of think on your own. So I think that stuff that comes out now is maybe a little bit more obviously influenced by outside sources. Not a judgment, just like that's how it seems to me. Whereas like this stuff just comes from like a place of like what? Everything I look at in these things is sort of like filled. It fills like my head with cartoon question marks. Like, why did you make these decisions? Like my kid he's of the age now where like he really is understanding like the cartoons that he watches and is incorporating them into his play. But like 6 months ago, a year ago, he was coming up with weird stuff, and like he still does, but like now it's a lot more like I could identify the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles episode where he got that from. Whereas a year ago, it was just like just weird stuff naturally coming into his brain from different sources that he didn't quite understand, and he was trying to make sense of. And he was making up all of this stuff that just was like, I don't understand any of this. And I think that the older material just sort of naturally has a little bit more of that WTF going on than you're going to have for stuff. But the cool thing is that kids today are going to be able to put out stuff and learn faster and put out quality stuff faster. And I think that like there's something really intriguing about that.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the way for me that I was kind of coming to that idea and that point was that like you don't have really the opportunity to make something that looks shitty anymore. And I don't say shitty as a knock, because that is like the most unfiltered type of creation that it's hard to achieve nowadays, because everything does make the creative process easier. And usually that stuff comes stock on your phone already, or as a free app that you can use. And like, I would need to make an invitation for like my kids, whatever. And in the past, you'd have to call your friend who was a graphic designer or like hire someone to do it. But now it's like, well, I pull up the app and here's a template. I just take those words out, put my words in, and put a new picture in, and boom, I have like this really beautiful looking, like, oh my God, come to my kid's like birthday party or something. Like it's not, and again, not a knock, not being like, well, it was better when I was young. It's just not the way it was used to. And I think that there is something that does get lost by not being able to kind of like stumble through the creative process when it's so easy to immediately be like, well, this is easily digestible and I can look at this and not be like, oh, that's hideous.
Well, I do think there is something slightly detrimental to it. Like I think that it's great to have all those tools, but you do need to have somebody kind of like make you question the tools. When I got into video games, as like in a critical sense, like the thing that always interested me most about video games was process, how things evolved over time and developed. And over the course of my career as a video game critic, the process is the thing that got walled off. PR just doesn't want you to see process. And it's sort of understandable because, like you said, like they don't want you to see the ugly parts of the process. They want you to see the polished endpoint and buy it. And there's a marketing angle there that I understand and sympathize with. But at the same time, by walling that stuff off, it makes it harder to connect with creatively. I follow a couple folks that do in-process miniature painting, which I find fascinating because miniatures look ridiculous when they're in process. And then there's like this magical moment where like everything comes together and then they look gorgeous. And I think that it's so informative. If you want to paint miniatures and you only see beautiful miniatures out there, and this is like an analog thing. So like it's a little bit different, but if you only see pictures of beautifully painted miniatures and yours don't look like that, you're never going to get there because you're never going to understand that there's a whole process of ugliness that leads up to, and I don't mean ugliness, but I mean unfinishedness and rawness and you have to constantly work and let things dry and layer things. And there's you have to trust the process. But if you don't know that there's a process to trust, you're going to become discouraged, right?
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, because everything is so at your fingertips and readily available, and everything is so like once it's on the internet, everyone sees it or everyone hears it. Or like, for instance, I got a buddy who plays in the band, and I was shooting the breeze with him, and I was like, "Oh, what are you doing for your set list tonight?" I was like, "You doing any new songs? I know you've been working on like a new album." And he was like, "Yeah, we don't really play any new songs that are unreleased. We play stuff from the album that we're promoting, but like for the next one, it's tough, man." He goes, "Because once you play that song live once, it belongs to the world, because someone will have their phone out, it'll end up on the internet, and then like, people don't like seeing that process anymore, like where they get to hear that kind of rawness and like, hear it in their brain, and then they hear it on the album. Like it's one of those things where you just can't give the people what you actually think that they want, because it's never good enough in that moment. And then, it takes the specialness away because everyone sees it, and I agree with that to a point, because I think there is a certain degree of like when you're coming up, and when I was coming up and things were like a little more raw, like you could do whatever, like, what, we're just gonna throw some new songs tonight and just see what sticks. Or like, you go to a comedy club and people are like working out material, and these places don't allow you to film. It's hard to find a place where you could actually see raw creativity happening in real time anymore because of the internet, because everyone has like a 4K camera in their pocket at all times. So I think the idea of all this is pretty cool. I think Hutchings is doing like a really cool thing by putting all this together. And I mean, we did talk about 1,000-Year-Old Vampire on a previous episode, so we know he's got the stuff. So this is a really nice, I think, worth checking out project. It feels like something special.
Yeah, and it harkens to a time when like these things are sort of free of what you're talking about, that pressure, that need for perfection. These aren't made for wide distribution. These things are made for a very small group of people, like your friends at that time, to make them laugh and have like enjoy something in the moment, and then sort of to not matter anymore. And there's something kind of just like really wonderful about that. And there really isn't a space, I think, naturally in the way our culture currently works for that kind of creativity. And it's really refreshing and nice to see that kind of creativity kind of preserved and presented in as nice a form as this book is. And speaking of the book, it's standard RPG size. I don't think that this one is limited. I think that you can still get copies of it. Exalted Funeral sold me this one. I would go there first, of course, because we're pals. But then you could also just check out Hutchingsonian or Tim Hutchings' official site has you could find it. I'll throw the links in the thing, and I'm sure that it exists in a digital form on drive-through.
Yeah, and when in doubt, GOOGLE.
Yep,
help you every time. So that was awesome. Stu, any final thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I do have a final thought. If you have modules like this, or even just old maps, notes, anything like that, and you want to get rid of them, send them to me. I will find a way to preserve them. Maybe hand them off to Tim. So just don't throw this stuff out. I think it's one of those things that people don't realize is worthy of other people to treasure. Every time I find a map or anything like this, like the ephemera of gaming, it makes me so happy. And if you show it to somebody else, they also get a kick out of it. And I think that it's just stuff that's easy to throw in the garbage. So I when in doubt, send me your campaign notes, drawings, maps, what have you. You can hit me up. There's contact information all over the podcast site and everything. You can find me.
Yeah, buddy. We love that kind of stuff. And this
like,
is another
I need more paper,
I mean, you do like killing trees. Like it's one of your favorite things. So
house is a fire trap, man.
So much paper. I mean, the amount of paper that you have, it's like living in a matchbook factory,
Oh my God.
Anyway, this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on the Instagram at Vintage RPG. I actually have both the Oracle Collection and Habitation of the Stone Giant Lord coming up in April. So look out for that.
Very cool. You can find me on the Twitter and on Instagram at John McGuire RPG. I'm posting more because I have things to promote. You can pick up my book, Rocket to Russia, over at Exalted Funeral from 321 Action. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Our reviews really do help other listeners find us. And if you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We got early release episodes. We've got cool stuff coming up that we can't talk about yet, but we will be talking about on the Patreon. Stu's book, you get an early look at it, still tentatively titled Experience Points. You get a behind-the-scenes look at my stuff, 3, 2, 1 action, as well as so much more, and a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.